Welcome back. Now, as promised, the news in detail. Let's first get to our top story. U.S. President Donald Trump has reiterated his offer to mediate what he called the explosive situation in Kashmir. Speaking to reporters at the Oval Office, Trump said the complicated Kashmir situation has a lot to do with religion. Trump said he will raise the matter with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the G7 summit in France over the weekend.
I think we're helping the situation, but there's tremendous problems between those two countries, as you know, and I will do the best I can to mediate or do something. Great relationship with both of them, but they are not exactly friends at this moment. Complicated situation. A lot has to do with religion. Religion's a complicated subject.
Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department has called on India to release thousands of detained Kashmiris and to restore their basic liberties. Let's remain on topic. Indian occupation forces have martyred 2 more civilians in Kashmir. They were martyred during search operations in Baramulla. This comes after occupation forces arrested 30 more people during clashes in Srinagar. Occupying forces used pellet guns and tear gas shells to disperse demonstrators, injuring dozens. More than 4,000 Kashmiris have been detained over the last 17 days, and a strict curfew is still in place. Well, in response to India's unprovoked firing along the line of control, the Pakistani army has killed 6 Indian soldiers, including an officer, and has wounded scores of others. Pakistan's military said 2 Indian bunkers were also destroyed. 3 civilians, including a 7-year-old boy, were martyred in unprovoked Indian firing in the Hot Springs sector along the line of control. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Office summoned the Indian Deputy High Commissioner Gaurav Ahluwalia to protest against ceasefire violations by Indian forces. In other news, the 9th round of Afghan peace talks between the U.S. and Taliban are set to resume in Doha over the weekend. U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad said he will try to finalize an agreement on remaining issues. Khalilzad said he has briefed the Trump administration on his negotiations with the Taliban and discussed the next steps. After meeting with the Taliban in Qatar, Khalilzad will travel to Kabul to consult with the Afghan government. The U.S. has said it will prevent a recently released Iranian oil tanker from delivering its cargo to Syria. The tanker Grace 1 was released by Gibraltar on Sunday after being detained for 5 weeks. U.S. State Secretary Mike Pompeo said the U.S. will act if the tanker heads to Syria.
The United States has a set of sanctions that preclude crude oil from being shipped to any country. We've made clear anyone who touches it, anyone who supports it, anyone who allows a ship to dock is at risk of receiving sanctions from the United States of America. So if that ship again heads to Syria, we'll take every action we can consistent with those sanctions.
Well, the U.S. has also warned Greece and all Mediterranean ports against helping that Iranian vessel. Greek authorities have said they've not been given notice of docking by the Iranian ship. Well, Australia has agreed to join the U.S.-led military coalition aimed at protecting oil tankers and cargo shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said Canberra will send troops, a plane, and a warship to the Persian Gulf. Australia will send a surveillance plane for 1 month before the end of 2019. An Australian frigate will also be deployed in January 2020 for 6 months. Morrison says the time-limited contribution is in Australia's national and economic interests.
This destabilising behaviour is a threat to Australian interests in the region, particularly our enduring interest in the security of global sea lanes of communication. 15 to 16% of crude oil and 25 to 30% of refined oil destined for Australia transits through the Straits of Hormuz. So it is a potential threat to our economy.
Meanwhile, the U.S. has urged the UN to extend an arms embargo on Tehran that is due to expire next year as part of the Iran nuclear deal. On to news coming out of Yemen now, where Houthi rebels have claimed they've shot down a U.S. drone in the southeast of the capital, Sana'a. The group's Al Masira TV said the MQ-9 drone was brought down in a Houthi-controlled area of the Mar Governorate. In a statement, the U.S. military's Central Command said it was aware of the reports but declined to give further information. Meanwhile, UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths has warned that Yemen is in danger of breaking apart.
Coalition. The fragmentation of Yemen is becoming a stronger and more pressing threat. And this, of course, makes our efforts in the Yemeni peace process more urgent than ever. And there is no time to lose. The stakes are becoming too high for the future of Yemen, the Yemeni people, and indeed the wider region.
Well, his statement comes after separatists seized the port city of Aden and 2 government military bases near the adjacent provincial capital of Zanzibar. On to Turkey now, where riot police have fired water cannon and tear gas to disperse protesters demonstrating in the southeastern province of Diyarbakir. Demonstrators were protesting against the ouster of 3 Kurdish mayors 5 months after they were elected. The Interior Ministry says the ousted mayors of the 3 major cities are accused of various crimes, including having links with a terrorist organization. Ankara replaced the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party's mayors with state officials. The government has also detained over 400 people for suspected militant links. The People's Democratic Parties said the mayor's removal is a political coup against the political will of the Kurdish people. China, meanwhile, has warned that the ISIS militant group is reviving itself in Syria. Beijing's envoy to Syria, Xie Xiaoyan, urged the international community to pay attention to that threat. The Chinese ambassador said the fight against terrorism is not yet finished. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says that ISIS is stronger than before in some areas, but its capability to carry out attacks has reduced. Pompeo says the U.S. and 80 other countries executed a plan to defeat ISIS in the Middle East. Well, the U.S. State Department has formally approved a major $8 billion sale of F-16 fighter jets to Taiwan. The Defense Security Cooperation Agency said the deal includes 66 aircraft and 75 General Electric Company engines. The agency said the deal will help Taiwan maintain a credible defense. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen said the sale will help the country build a new air force and boost its air defense capacity. China has already denounced the widely discussed sale and has warned of serious consequences in response. Beijing considers Taiwan a renegade province. On to Indonesia, where authorities have sent 200 more police officials to the eastern province of Papua to curb protests against local students' detention. Riots began when Papuan students allegedly disrespected the Indonesian flag during the country's Independence Day celebrations. Insurgency against Jakarta's rule has simmered for decades, with allegations that security forces committed rights abuses against Papua's ethnic Melanesian population. Thousands of people took to the streets of Sorong, Manokwari, and Jayapura cities, damaging an airport and torching government buildings. Police are also on a hunt for over 250 inmates who set ablaze a prison before escaping during violent riots. Several prison employees were injured when prisoners pelted them with stones as they tried to escape. Indonesia's President Joko Widodo has called for calm, and the government has pledged to investigate the protesters' complaints. Nearly 100 migrants stranded on the rescue ship off the coast of Lampedusa have disembarked on an Italian island. This comes after Italian prosecutors ordered the seizure of the open arms and the evacuation of migrants. Officials said the decision was made due to the difficult situation on board. It came shortly after Spain said it is sending a naval vessel to escort the ship to Majorca. Italy had refused to allow the ship to dock, though some miners and sick had been taken ashore. Earlier, about 10 migrants jumped off the ship, hoping to swim to the island. Open Arms welcomed the decision, which ended a 19-day standoff between the Spanish charity and the government in Rome. Remaining with Italy, President Sergio Mattarella has begun two-day talks with parties to seek a way out of that country's political crisis. Mattarella will now decide if he wants to call for early elections or to try to put together a new coalition. Earlier, Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte announced his resignation after weeks of political turmoil. It came after the ruling coalition's League Party planned a no-confidence motion against the government. Conte accused Interior Minister Matteo Salvini of sinking the coalition for personal and political gains. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has asked the European Union to scrap the Irish border backstop provision of the Brexit agreement. Responding to Johnson, European Council President Donald Tusk says he has given no realistic alternatives to the Irish backstop. The details in this report.
In a letter to the European Council President Donald Tusk, the British Prime Minister called the backstop plan undemocratic. Tusk has accused Prime Minister Johnson of pushing towards border checks in Ireland after Brexit. He says those against the backstop in fact support re-establishing a border.
We also note that the letter does not provide a legal operational solution to prevent the return of a hard border on the island of Ireland. It does not set out what any alternative arrangements could be, and in fact it recognises that there is no guarantee that such arrangements will be in place by the end of the transitional period.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel says the EU will think about the practical solution of post-Brexit border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Merkel said renegotiating the withdrawal agreement will not be required.
Boris Johnson referred to the backstop issue, but that isn't new. The British Parliament has also addressed it. The moment we have a practical arrangement on how to preserve the Good Friday Agreement and at the same time define the borders of the internal market, we would not need the backstop anymore.
Earlier, Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar said the backstop provision cannot be changed.
Former Vatican Treasurer Cardinal George Pell has lost a legal appeal against his sex abuse convictions in Australia. Pell, who is the highest-ranking Catholic to be convicted of child sex offences, will remain in prison for at least another 3 years. Pell was sentenced in March to 6 years in jail after being found guilty on 5 charges of abusing 2 boys. Pell appealed his conviction to Victoria's Court of Appeal on 3 grounds. He argued the jury's verdict was unreasonable. His appeal was dismissed by a panel of 3 judges in Victoria's Court of Appeal.
By a majority of 2 to 1, the Court of Appeal has dismissed Cardinal Pell, George Pell's appeal against his conviction for the commission of sexual offences. He will continue to serve his sentence of 6 years imprisonment.
The 78-year-old Australian prelate will now consider a final appeal in the nation's highest court. Well, a displaced Syrian teacher gives classes at an internally displaced persons camp in Idlib. Conditions at the school after arriving in Atme, a camp for IDPs, were never ideal for students. This report has the details.
An outdoor school under the olive trees was set up by Muhammad, a teacher who was seeking refuge in a camp. The idea was to teach children who have limited access to education due to war. The flare-up in attacks has taken away even the option of a makeshift school in mosque and other buildings.
We fled to the region of Atme around 4 months ago, and we came here under the olive trees. I saw the suffering of the children, so I tried to take a charitable decision to make a school under the olive trees. The idea was welcomed so that the children can continue the studies as they were doing at school before they fled.
As children learn to read and write under the olive trees in an outdoor setting, it gives them hope. The residents of the camp look forward to a truce in the region so they could resume to normal life. Meanwhile, the basic education is being imparted to children at the camp.
My dream is that there is a school here with enough seats, tents, stationery for the students, so the young generation can continue with their studies and our revolution will continue with them.
According to UNICEF, more than 2.5 million Syrian children have fled the country since fighting began. Some groups put the number of children killed at over 20,000.
And coming up next in this bulletin. A new tool is named Off Facebook Activity. And bowing to pressure from environmentally conscious consumers. Let's begin this segment of the Bulletin in Iceland, where a meeting between the leaders of the 7 Nordic countries on climate change has ended. The meeting was called for after a glacier in Iceland melted away for the first time in history. More on that now in this report.
The Öxarkol had existed for 700 years before it melted away just a few days ago. Environmentalists laid a commemorative plaque on the site of the glacier on Sunday that had been declared dead. The ceremony was a warning to the world about the dangers of global warming. The Nordic region's leaders signed a joint declaration to promote the UN's Sustainable Development Goals under the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. Iceland's Prime Minister Katrín Jakobsdóttir said the declaration puts the region on a path to becoming the most sustainable in the world.
And I'm very happy to say that this morning we endorsed a new vision for the Nordic cooperation that prioritizes the areas that are central in our cooperation, not least on climate change.
The signing comes as the unity of the international community on global warming has been shattered by political changes in some countries, including the United States. Leaders of the business community also attended the informal meeting in Iceland's capital, Reykjavik.
It shows that the Nordic companies are at the very cutting edge when it comes to innovation and sustainability, and that's important for the region and for the world. I think initiatives like this are vital for reaching the goals in the Sustainable Development Goals.
European cities have suffered through record-breaking heat waves this summer, with several countries from Britain to Germany and France seeing new temperature highs.
Social networking website Facebook is introducing a tool which allows users to control data that the company receives from other apps and websites. Replacing the option to clear history, the new tool is named Off Facebook Activity. Off Facebook Activity allows users to see a summary of the apps and websites that send information to the administration about a user's activity. Facebook says the tool is a new way to give people more transparency and have more control on the platform. Currently, commercial websites visited by a user may send Facebook details of that visit, prompting the social network to show related ads. The new feature will be rolled out first in Ireland, South Korea, and Spain, and later elsewhere. Facebook has been facing pressure from users and governments to ramp up privacy rules across its platform. Now, bowing to pressure from environmentally conscious consumers, British supermarkets have begun taking steps. They are stripping their shelves of plastic wrapping over concerns about saving the oceans from waste. For details, watch this report.
Would you bring your own packaging to the supermarket? That's what customers are doing at this Waitrose store in Oxford in a trial to cut plastic use. Shoppers can also pay a deposit to borrow packaging if they don't have their own. It's a bid to cut down on the estimated 800,000 tonnes of single-use plastic used by UK supermarkets every year. And so far, it's proving popular.
If you could get everything that theoretically could be taken out without risking, health and safety or whatever, then it should be done.
Following such positive reaction, the trial has been extended and will soon roll out to 3 other stores. But for now, it remains just a test. Here at this shop in North London, though, the changes are permanent. Since November, plastic has been removed from more than 2,000 products. More paper and glass are being used, while cheese and fish are wrapped in a biodegradable film made from sugarcane.
We did this to show the other big supermarket chains that it wasn't as difficult as they said it was. And that if we can do this in 10 weeks, then surely with tiny resources, surely with all the resources they have, they can make a big move.
For environmental groups, such moves are steps in the right direction, but so far only half of the UK's top 10 supermarket chains have announced targets for plastic reduction.
We can't leave it up to the whims of well-meaning supermarkets to fix this problem. All the supermarkets need to move, and they need to move ambitiously and quickly. And that's why we're calling on the government to set legally binding targets for how much plastic we make and use in this country.
The UK government aims to eliminate avoidable plastic waste by 2042. But with an estimated 8 million tonnes of plastic polluting the oceans every year, environmentalists say that more should be done and sooner.
Asian stock markets are mixed as investors await indications of economic stimulus from the U.S. Federal Reserve later this week. Major bourses are either in flat or negative territory as Wall Street fears of a U.S. recession cross the Pacific. Tokyo's Nikkei index and the ASX index in Australia have surrendered gains from yesterday. Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Seoul are trading flat. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. And with that, you're all caught up. Thank you for watching this bulletin here at Indus News.